Good afternoon. Welcome to the Alluserv webinar. We're going to give it another minute, and then we'll get started with our webinar today. Just waiting for people to come on. I'm giving him another minute. Thank you for being so promptly. The others. It's 3 o'clock. We'll give another minute, and then we will start the program. So welcome to the Alluserv educational series, and we will get started in a moment. We will start our webinar just in a few moments. While we're waiting, if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in, and we will get to them towards the end of the presentation. Also, some housekeeping tips on the webinar recording and the PowerPoint slideshow and the certification of participation, which is for the CEU credits, will be available to download on Monday, June 24th at alluserv.com. Once again, welcome to the Alluserv webinar. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I do want to tell everybody some housekeeping tips. The webinar recording, the PowerPoint slideshow, and the certification of participation, which is for your continuing education credit, will be available to download on Monday, June 24th at alluserv.com. It may be before, but it will be definitely by that day. So please go to that site and download your certificate of participation for your CEU credits and to review the audio. There's also be a survey when you finish the webinar. Please answer that. That helps us get better on our programming. It also gives us more information, and it will give you more information to Jordan. So let's get started. My name is Marsha Diamond, and I am the facilitator for this afternoon. And I work with Alluserv on new business development. So let me start by saying, are food allergies important to you? They certainly should be. 1 out of every 10 adults has a food allergy. So we decided to put together this program, and And so today, what will happen is you will learn from our guest speaker, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a few moments. Objectives are you will be able to easily identify the top 8 food allergens in the United States. You'll be able to use your best practices when handling food allergy requests. You will recognize current labeling laws and exemptions with food allergens. You will understand how the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, Section 5404 Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and food allergies impact on your establishment. So you'll walk away with a lot of takeaways today. So sit back, enjoy, and let's get started. So let me introduce you to our featured and honored speaker, Jordan Maeson, MD. She made her mark on the food allergy community when she was chosen as the SEM for the National Restaurant Association to develop search-safe allergens. Following the program launch, she continued working with companies both nationally and internationally with her own company, Safer Dining, so that's 2018. She does food allergy consulting and education with that company and today. Jordan received her BS in biology and sports medicine and continued her education with the University of Florida, specializing in nuclear cardiology. Upon being diagnosed with her adult onset of deadly food allergens, Jordan utilized a diverse background. It became her mission to educate the food service and hospitality industry. Jordan is a nationally recognized speaker, both speaking for and working closely to develop informational and training content with Food Protection Association, universities, state departments of agriculture, the FDA Food Protection Partnership, International Food Protection Training Institute, Regulatory Compliance Services, the U.S. FDA, and numerous food manufacturers and companies. So I'm very honored to have Jordan Maeson join us today, and I'm honored that Alluserv was able to sponsor this and sponsor her speaking. So welcome, Jordan.
Thank you very much, Marsha. All right, let's get this started. Thank you for everybody for being here. First, I was listening to some music to get prepared, and I heard some lyrics that were so fitting that I must share them before we actually get started. They're from Imagine Dragons' Believer. First things first, I'm going to say all the words inside my head. I'm fired up, and I'm tired of the way things have been. I think that is very poignant and very fitting. So as I said, I want to take a moment to thank Alluserv and Marcia for sponsoring today's webinar. I also want to thank all of you for joining us for this important webinar concerning food allergies. As Marcia stated, my name is Jordan Maeson, and yes, there's all the pretty stuff on paper. However, credentials, status, age, sexual orientation, race, gender, etc. mean absolutely nothing to food allergies. This presentation will, of course, be professional and educational and informative. However, it's coming from a woman that had her entire future planned when a breast cancer diagnosis preceding anaphylactic food allergies arrived on her doorstep and literally blew up my world. I'm fortunate enough to be allergic to all seasonings and spices. Yes, you heard me correctly, all seasonings and spices. Now, try dating a Latin with that. I dare you. Once I realized my world would never be the same, I chose to do something about it for myself and the millions of others with food allergies. As I work to develop best practices for food allergen handling, create training, content, speak nationally, and advocate for legislation, I was also working towards my dream, Lake Tahoe. This is a nerd moment. This is a NASA satellite image of Lake Tahoe taken on March 9th, 2019. We may have had an awesome winter. When I had the opportunity to sell my company, focus on my own health and wellness, and live my dream, I did that. Living in Lake Tahoe has allowed me time in the woods to think, which I'm a thinker, and reflect. So what is my point with all of this? Why am I discussing the importance of food allergies with you today instead of playing in the woods or crawling on my rocks? The question in itself is your answer. However, we'll discuss why food allergies should be important to you. In addition, we'll discuss the big 8 or top 8 food allergens. I'll bombard you with very nerdy and statistical numbers because, hey, I love math and I can't see you. So don't worry, we will also cover the extremely exciting information concerning food labeling laws and understanding how the ADA and a 504 plan affect your establishment. Marcia's going to take a quick poll before we move on. Do you either personally have or know somebody that has a food allergy? Please select which one. And we're going to see out of the group that we have here today, just how many people have or know someone that has a food allergy. And so Marcia's going to collect that information, and then I'm going to keep moving forward.
Okay, we have about 95% have either know you personally or know somebody. 95% out of our group. Yep.
All right, so 95%. So everybody, I hope you heard that. 95% of this group either has a food allergy or knows somebody that has a food allergy. And I'm going to try to move on. Maybe. Marcia. Possibly moving on. We may just look at this poll for the next.
Okay.
There we go. So I want everyone to grasp the vast impact a food allergy diagnosis has on an individual, partner or spouse, parents and family, friends, coworkers, and more. Remember, we just said 95% of this group has a food allergy or knows someone has a food allergy. Let's review a few statistics to put them in perspective. The latest information, which we'll discuss in greater length in future slides, was performed by Fair Health at the conclusion of 2016. Previous statistics used were from the end of 2014. According to the 2016 statistics, approximately 32 million Americans have at least one food allergy. That's 10% of the entire population, or 1 in 10. If I use their numeric data, with 32 million Americans having at least one food allergy of the 10% population, which is the pie graph you see on the left-hand upper side, we use the current census information available for today, 329 million Americans. With the current trajectory, we'd have roughly 80 million Americans with at least one food allergy. That would be 25% of the population. Before I move on, you may be thinking 25% isn't that much. After all, it's the smaller number. Let me just say this, and keep in mind this is coming from someone with deadly food allergies. The 25% includes myself. We are the ones who ultimately make the decision. We may be going to dinner with our family or friends, meeting a business client for a drink, going with the family on vacation, or deciding to get our first tattoo. All of these decisions must also include the person with the food allergy, since their needs must be accommodated. The experiences had by the other guests, the 75% or the 90%, are influenced by their later decisions, even when the food allergic individual isn't around, as they're impressed with the service, knowledge, willingness to accommodate, and the excellent customer service. They tell their friends, and so forth. So now this 25% has grown because someone has a food allergy, and it affects everyone in their life as well. Why is learning about food allergies even necessary? First, there is no cure for food allergies. You may have heard about different drug testing and pharmaceuticals that are out there that are still in the FDA process. These are to reduce and minimize the reaction. They are not for a cure. Every 3 minutes, a food allergic reaction sends someone to the emergency department. A food allergy is the most common cause of anaphylaxis in the United States for emergency room visits. Over 50% of all food allergic reactions occur outside the home. Okay, so we're going to have another quick poll here.
Okay. Here we go. Coming out.
Do you believe that you can name the top 8 food allergens in the U.S. right now? If we were to do a pop quiz.
So
which none of them.
It's coming 81 to 20, 78 to 23. We're getting people who are voting, confident people.
Some pretty confident people out there.
Pretty confident people. 77 to 23.
All right, so about 77% of you believe that you can name all 8 of the food allergens. Let's see if you are correct. 90% of all food allergens in the U.S. are caused by 8 foods. I'm lucky enough to be in the remaining 10%, because who really wants to be in the majority? The top 8 are eggs. Let's see if those 77% of you are correct. Eggs, fish, milk, peanuts, shellfish. The U.S. recognizes crustacean shellfish only, such as crab, lobster, and shrimp. The reason I discuss this is because this does not include molluscan shellfish or mollusks, such as mussels, clams, oysters, and scallops. There is a very distinct difference between the two. Soybeans, tree nuts, and finally, wheat. So how did you 77% do? We won't do another poll. We'll just see how you all think you did. Although the U.S. only recognizes the top 8, it's important to understand that other countries recognize additional food allergens. Many visitors to the U.S. are often unaware and expect us to be prepared here as well. Canada recognizes 11, the U.S. 8, plus mustard, sesame seeds, and sulfite. The UK recognizes 14, the 11 we've mentioned with Canada and the US, plus celery, the molluscan shellfish, which we had mentioned the U.S. only recognizes crustacean shellfish, plus lupin. Lupin is a flower. It's highly cross-reactive to peanuts and should be treated as such. So speaking of cross-reactive and peanuts, how much can really do harm? I love this image here because although the amount may vary for each individual, studies have shown that only 1 milligram of peanut, or 1/600th, is enough to induce an anaphylactic reaction. When we look at this amount in comparison to the size of a dime, it's quite evident just how easily someone may not see this on a plate of food. In addition, I've included this study that showed that peanuts remain in the saliva for up to 3 hours after ingestion. The same study suggests the 3-hour rule include a peanut-free meal, brushing your teeth, chewing gum to become 87% non-reactive. That still leaves a 13% chance that someone will react. They also talk about sharing utensils, a straw, or even kissing a person within 3 hours after ingesting a peanut can be fatal to the person with a food allergy. That's why dating with food allergies is so much fun. We talk about the harm, we talk about how much can cause a reaction, but what is a reaction? The most severe reaction is an anaphylactic shock. It's an acute reaction to a food allergy. Working in any food service industry, you should be familiar with these common symptoms so you can quickly identify when someone starts to experience anaphylactic shock. I want to take a moment and be very real, and I want to let you all know about 2 different times that I personally went into anaphylactic shock. I want to talk about these because I want to find out what impacts do you believe watching me go through an anaphylactic reaction in a restaurant or in a hospital cafeteria had on those around me. Do you feel as if those patrons would return to those businesses? Do you think they told their friends and those friends told their friends about what they had witnessed? How do you think I feel every time I put my life and trust in someone else's hands when I go out to dinner? Or when I want to pick up a package of ground meat at a grocery store and wonder if they've cleaned the counter properly after packaging a pre-seasoned grab-and-go protein item. The trauma and fear exposed to my friends that were with me on the days that I've gone in anaphylactic shock now will never eat with me again. So for example, I went out to eat one evening, had a meal came out, first bite, it induced anaphylactic reaction. Within 60 seconds, we needed to find my EpiPen. We injected the EpiPen. I was living in Jacksonville, working at a trauma center. We realized it was going to take them too long for the ambulance to get there, and my friend needed to drive me to the hospital instead. Everyone in the restaurant is watching. The waiters are watching. The managers are now watching. I'm starting to lose consciousness. We only have 2 EpiPens. An EpiPen will only give you about 10 minutes of airway. We have to inject the first one. We now have to inject the second one right before we leave to start to drive me to the trauma center. This is severely traumatic for anyone that's watching. The second time that I want to talk about is eating in my own cafeteria at the hospital that I worked in. When we checked the ingredients, we found out later that the ingredients had been changed and they were never updated. So I went back to my break room and went into anaphylactic shock. Immediately had to have my coworkers rush me down to my own trauma bay, go into a full code, went into an intubation, and spent 7 days in ICU. This has a major impact on everyone around me and everyone around the person that has to deal and go into anaphylactic shock. This is not just about the person that has the food allergy. So we talked about epinephrine. The epinephrine auto-injectors market in the U.S. is expected to exceed more than $2.5 billion by 2024. The picture up top is what most people think about. And granted, I have absolutely no problem sticking other people with a needle, yet I'm not a fan of having stuck myself. I will wait to the last second to stick myself with an EpiPen, which is why I can relate so well to this image. If there isn't ink in a needle for a new tattoo, then I don't want it near me. Epinephrine is the only medication that can help save the life of someone going into anaphylactic shock. It's also pure adrenaline, and as I said previously, it allows approximately 10 to 15 minutes of airflow so we can breathe. One important note, did you know that not all ambulances are required to carry epinephrine? This is an important reason to always notify a 911 operator if someone is having an allergic reaction. This ensures an ambulance arrives with epinephrine. Over the next few slides, we are going to review a study that was commissioned by FAIR, the Food Allergy Research and Education, and then performed by FAIR Health, a different FAIR, a national independent nonprofit organization that collects and analyzes data on healthcare costs to analyze claims with anaphylaxis and history of food allergy diagnosis. The reason these next few slides and statistics are so important is because over the past few decades, research continually focused on geography, specifically urban versus rural. Then they started to look at gender, age, the foods we ingested, and the costs that were associated with food allergies and anaphylaxis. So when we came out with the new statistical data that was studied between 2009 and 2016, there were some very interesting statistics and data that were found. Keep in mind, this comes from the claims that were coming in through insurance claims. Overall, from 2009 to 2016, the insurance claims rose by 377%. Lab services associated with the anaphylaxis increased by 871%. Charges for the lab services increased by 5,390%. As you look at the screen and you see the two maps from 2009 to 2016, interestingly, the top 5, the highest percentage of anaphylaxis claims per state for 2009 and 2016 changed except for one, Connecticut. It continued to be ranked as number 5. The number 1 state with the highest percentage of claims in 2016 was Delaware. Massachusetts and New York were ranked number 1 and number 2 in 2009. They both passed food allergy laws for food handlers in 2009. They were no longer on the list in 2016. Personally, I don't think their numbers went down just by coincidence. So as I stated earlier, we were talking about geography. One of the biggest trends that was followed over the past 20 years was the geography between urban and rural. By doing so, they created what became known as the hygiene hypothesis. In basic terms, it's where by having a greater exposure to microbes, allergens, and foods, the children that grew up on or around farms in the rural areas had less food allergies. However, the newest data gave us quite a surprise. When they analyzed the years of 2000 to 2016, the urban allergy diagnosis increased by 70%, while the rural allergies increased by 110%. It blew the hygiene hypothesis right out of the water. They also looked at the reactions by food type. And here you see the large purple area is the anaphylactic reaction by other. Other is 33%. Why is the other important? This includes wheat, soy, and people like myself. Unfortunately, those of you in the healthcare field will feel my pain. There's currently are not any ICD-9 or ICD-10 codes that correspond with a wheat allergen, a soy allergen, or multiple other food types. On the same note, tracking statistical data for anaphylactic deaths is extremely difficult, as most times the deaths are noted from final causation such as cardiac arrest, respiratory arrest, or brain death, not anaphylaxis. It's also important, the reason we discuss the other and not having these codes, is because we're not getting proper documentation, which allows us for proper research, tracking, funding, labeling, and drug approval. If we look at the rest of the pie chart, we see no surprise. The second number, highest number, is peanuts, followed by tree nuts. And then we have the similar, smaller percentages of egg, crustaceans, milk. We'll talk about this one in a moment. Fish, fruits and veggies, and then food additives. So I said I would speak about milk a little bit further, and there's a reason for this. Although the milk products were only responsible for 5% of all allergy claims and diagnoses for 2016, it had the highest average claim cost and services per patient. The reason we discuss milk is one reason is milk is the most difficult to remove, to clean and sanitize from any surface. The other point I want to make is milk is the food allergy. Dairy is a category. So if we think about it, eggs and milk, both allergies. They're both in the dairy section when you go to a grocery store. However, they are separate ingredients and they are separate allergens. So again, looking still at the food types, the statistics stood out to me that relate to the percentage of the claims. Peanuts rose by 445%, tree nuts rose by 603%, while other, again, not having proper documentation, only rose by 71%. When we looked at the age and gender, an interesting variation was found. Although ages 0 to 18 had the highest percentage of 66% and 19 plus had 34%, the largest group when it was broken down was 0 to 3 of 27%, while the smallest group of 4% was over 60. When it came to gender, an interesting flip-flop occurred. The blue line represents the male and the green line represents the females. From the ages 0 to 18, males had the highest claim percentage. For 19 plus, females had the highest claim percentage. So when we look at everything, and we talk about all of these numbers and the gender and the age and what they were eating and when it occurred, we also looked at the cost, because that's really where it kind of boils down to. They took into account 2 services. 2 services is quite low. If you have a reaction, you're going to have a hospital visit with a follow-up visit with testing and then another follow-up visit. But they took into account 2 visits. They took each allergen, and what I did is I took an average across the board. In 2013, they estimated the cost to be $4.3 billion. In 2016, using their numbers of 32 million food allergic people, of $503 per patient, it would cost $16.1 billion. In just 3 years, the estimated cost has risen $12 billion, or 400%. These are statistics for 2016. Keep in mind, we are halfway through 2019. So just imagine what that number is now. And also, who's really paying for this? Do they have insurance? Is it going to the taxpayer? Is it going to the hospitals? Who's paying for that $16.1 billion for just 2 services? So I want to talk about mitigating your risk. We've talked about the numbers, we've seen what it can do. We want to talk about how we can mitigate risk. So all of these numbers are great. So if it's dangerous, we take necessary precautions, just like exercising. It's easier said than done. So let's discuss what laws have been put in place to protect the food allergic individual and what impacts these have on a food service venue. We'll then review resources to mitigate your risk as a business owner or as an employee. If there is a food allergy incident at a facility, can you be sued? I don't need a poll for this one because I have a feeling all of you are shaking your head yes. You bet. So however, there are plenty of ways to reduce your liability, beginning with training. I'm going to review a few cases, and I want to say first that I apologize in advance for using companies that may have representatives that are on this call today. However, I feel it is important for everyone to understand that it doesn't matter how big or small your company, if proper training and protocols are not in place, you're in jeopardy. The first one I'm going to talk about is a grocery chain. There was a suit filed that was just recently dropped by a judge against a Florida grocery store or a grocery chain. The case is still active, however, against the employee for neglect. This was filed under the failure to comply with the labeling laws. This opened up a ginormous loophole that was found within the labeling laws, which grants the state to override authority over federal in certain and specific instances. We have a quick service restaurant that was a franchise. And although it's a franchise, the judge has ordered the case to move forward, holding both the employee and the corporation, the owners of the franchise and the corporation, accountable, and for the jury to determine final damages. A manufacturing company did not disclose on a label an allergy warning, although the product contained a milk product. This lawsuit was filed in March of 2018. The loophole that was uncovered within the grocery lawsuit most certainly does not apply in this matter. For those of you that are on here from universities, the university in this case violated and failed to provide reasonable modifications to its policies, practices, and procedures for students with food allergy-related disabilities, and failed to adequately train its staff on appropriate policies for accommodating individuals with food allergies. You may have heard where I just said they had students with food allergy-related disabilities. Now, two of the cases I talked about food labeling. Food Allergy Labeling and Consumer Protection Act of 2004. Now, if anyone on this call is from government, you'll find this statement a little funny, but this took effect in 2006. So technically, 2 years isn't too bad. Now, this affects all packaged foods sold in the U.S. Now, as you're looking at this, I want to give you a bit of information. This law does not apply to prescription over-the-counter drugs, personal care items such as cosmetics, mouthwash, toothpaste, kosher labeling, pet food, supplements, and supplies, any made-to-order restaurant food placed in a wrapper or container. Does not apply to any food product regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, such as meat, poultry, and processed eggs. Does not apply to any food product regulated by the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, such as alcoholic drinks, spirits, beer, and tobacco products. However, if you are required to have this label, it can be listed in one of three ways if there is an allergen. Within the ingredient list by using the allergen's common name, such as milk, egg, wheat, soy. Within the ingredient list in parentheses, if it's used in a less common name. So if they used whey, they must use milk right afterwards in parentheses. It can also be labeled, as in section number 2, using the word contains followed by the name of the major food allergen. We also discussed some of the lawsuits that were about having a food-related disability. So we're going to discuss the American with Disabilities Act and the Section 504 plan. But first, being a kid can be difficult. 80% of the population has been bullied at some point in their life. This is exponentially worse for a child with food allergies. A recent study showed 32% of all food allergic youths were bullied, most often with the use of the offending food. A food allergic individual becomes even more of a target when they have to sit at a table by themselves. They're not allowed through the lunch line. They're not allowed on field trips. They cannot enjoy and celebrate birthdays or any other parties or festivities that may involve food. They become a target when we make them one. Nobody wants to be left out. Life-threatening severe allergies may qualify as a disability. As stated above, the ADAA modified and expanded the definition of disability. The amendments increased the number of activities that are considered to be major life activities and changed the law to provide that a person with an episodic condition or a condition that is in remission must be considered disabled if the condition substantially limits a major life activity. As a result, individuals with severe allergies are now covered under Section 504 and the ADA. When the U.S. Department of Education and the Office for Civil Rights reviewed the key factors in determining whether a person is considered an individual with handicaps, they included such conditions and diseases as specific learning disabilities, diabetes, and food allergies. Once they added food allergies, it was a major game changer. With the U.S. Department of Agriculture, in cases with food allergy, generally children with food allergies or intolerances did not have a disability. That was according to U.S. Department of Agriculture. But amazingly, the governments had to work together, and we had to have everyone on board. So when a licensed physician's assessment of food allergies would result in a severe life-threatening anaphylactic reaction, the children's condition would meet the definition of a disability, and the substitutions prescribed by the licensed physicians must be made. Therefore, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights, the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, and American Disability Act all work together, and now food allergies are considered a handicap, a disability, and must be treated as such. Now that we have discussed allergens that impact the laws surrounding them, the lawsuits that result from them, I want to review how to mitigate all of your risks. One of the big things is to understand that accidents can happen. There is a huge difference between an accident and an incident. Accidents happen. However, with the right tools, awareness, and knowledge, you can prevent almost any incident from occurring. The main difference is making certain you're being proactive rather than reactive. This seems like a basic item, but one of the most valuable lessons I learned in school and in college was the KISS method. It's keep it simple, stupid. So does the food service industry really get it? Here's a little personal story, and the reason I chose this photo is it reminds me of my father. I grew up in a family, including my paternal and maternal grandparents, of restaurateurs and hoteliers. Hospitality it's in my DNA. However, my father, a trained chef, refused to ever cook for me once I developed my food allergies. I was too much of a pain in the butt. He just absolutely wouldn't do it. I always reflected on his attitude and thoughts with my approach. As I or any other trainer or consultant, you have to understand both sides in order for the relationship to work. So the reason that comes to mind is because then we started taking a look at the surveys that were done and wondering if they get it. And just like my father not wanting to cook for me, how does the food service industry feel about food allergies? And do they understand it? So when we did a survey, we looked at a couple different numbers. 10% were unaware that a food allergy can be fatal. 20% of staff prefer not to serve a patron with food allergies. 20% thought removing an allergen from a finished dish from a meal was safe. That number is actually better. In 2015, a survey showed that 40% felt that if you just removed the allergen from a dish, it made the meal safe. 30% could only name 3 food allergens. We had 77%, but we don't know how many of you were right. 40% believed that the allergies weren't real. In addition, about a third think that if you drink water, you can lessen the severity of an ongoing reaction. Additionally, a quarter of food establishment personnel are under the false impression that we can safely consume a small amount of the food that we're allergic to. Remember the picture of the dime and the small amount. A small amount will still cause an anaphylactic reaction. In order to implement your best practices and prevent accidents, training must be at the core of your establishment. Without it, any best practice or protocol you develop will be lost. Remember that you rely on your staff to keep your patients and patrons safe. Joe Gennady said it best: put your people at the center of your decisions. Cross-contamination is often used in food service establishments, and most of you discuss this on a regular basis when we talk about foodborne illnesses. However, when we talk about allergies, we talk about cross-contact. This is when one food comes in contact with another food and the proteins mix. Remember the image of the peanut particles next to the dime. Again, a small trace amount is most likely invisible. This is what makes it so dangerous, and it's the highest risk for a food allergic individual when we dine out. Make sure that your staff is aware of hotspots where cross-contact is most likely to occur. Have separate workspaces, equipment if possible, sanitation and protocols in place for allergen requests. Ingredient resources are an excellent and quick reference guide for staff when checking recipes or ingredient lists for a customer. I used to make sure on all of our ingredient resources that we included and also known as or commonly found in. Some of the commonly found in products would surprise you, especially when it comes to peanuts. Did you know that all pet food, almost all pet food, contains peanuts? It's also the most perfect time for you to introduce maybe a labeling company or to work with your POS system to ensure a cross-check of ingredients and labels are correct. If these companies are not aware of the labeling laws or what type of entries are most commonly used, or even forced written within your POS, they won't be any help. It's always important to ensure the company has a background, knowledge, and proper perspective, or they have the inside connect with an amazing food allergy consultant, someone like me. Let's give you some more information about some tools and resources. We've talked about cross-contact. We've talked about ingredient resources, labeling companies, POS systems. But we also have your tools and your resources. From experience, when a customer sees you utilizing purple equipment or purple tags, they recognize that, and they automatically feel safer in your establishment. We love to share that information on social media, and so other food allergy patrons are aware of this, and they can come patronize your businesses. There are multiple options available for allergen-free utensils and accessories. As you can see here, we have cutting boards, mixing bowls, spatulas, everything you can think of. There are also several other companies that make universal purple allergen equipment, and we can also have other color coding equipment if you prefer something else within your establishment. But do know that the purple color is the universal color that food allergen patrons recognize most often and quickly. We also have designated room service delivery carts that are not just for the healthcare industry. Having a safe and efficient mode to transport the allergen-free meal is essential in the continuity of care. You must have a flow from your communication from your kitchen to your patron or even to a patient. Think of the multiple food service venues. We have senior living facilities, long-term care, cafeterias, rehabilitation centers, preschools, universities, dining halls, and so many more that these carts are utilized. In addition, having a separate action station or a cooking station or even a prep station is ideal. We know that these aren't things that everyone can facilitate into their areas, but it is something for somebody to, even if you wanted to tag it or have an area that is separate for having an allergy meal that can be prepared. I'm going to discuss labels one more time because it is so important. Work with a labeling company to develop custom labels for your company. I chose this picture for a specific reason, and I'll tell you that. There are absolutely no laws requiring a company to alert anyone about a recipe change. That does not mean that you are not responsible to have this updated information. Develop an ingredient book. You do not have to list all your proprietary information, but if a customer or client is asking about specific foods, you should be able to tell them whether the food product contains their allergen. Be prepared for the time when adjustments are made quickly during your prep. The usual recipe may be altered. If this information is not passed along to the rest of your staff, changes are not made accordingly or to a label or to the ingredient list, you are still responsible. You must work with your vendors and manufacturers to keep this ingredient list updated. This picture was chosen because they have the little stick that says new recipe, and it's very rare that you will see this on any kind of product when you're in a grocery store. Most times when we go grocery shopping, it's like grocery shopping for the first time every time. You must always check the label because it's not required to let us know that something has changed or an ingredients have changed. So today we discussed the big 8 food allergens, which now 100% of you will be able to identify as eggs, fish, milk, peanuts, crustacean shellfish, soy, tree nuts, and wheat. You understand that it's important to work with an experienced food allergy consultant, not a one-size-fits-all. Plus, this makes the consultant responsible for all of this knowledge and research, not you. Developing and implementing a food allergy protocol is essential. Food Allergy Labeling and Consumer Protection Act of 2004 is essential to your company, regardless if you're in healthcare, if you're in the university, if you're a manufacturer. All of your products are going to have some sort of label. The disability laws are not restricted to K through 12. Make certain you understand how they affect your exact industry and your market. Lawsuits are very real. Not all publicity is good publicity. Food allergy training is an effective and marketable tool to keep your patients and patrons safer. The food allergy community is not only vocal, they are extremely loyal. Finally, reach out to your vendors, such as Alluserv, for food allergy designated equipment and tools.
So,
and finally,
please get, questions. I got 2 questions already. One is, will EpiPens be required in food service to have in there, like they have the EKG equipment? I can't remember the term, but will the EpiPens be required by law, or is it up to the discretionary of the food service venue?
So that is a really good question. So as far as, depending on who's asking that question, currently the EpiPen laws are dictated per state. If you, depending on what state, I'd be happy to answer that question separately for that individual. So if you're in a state that has passed the EpiPen law and it's required in a food service area, if it's in a restaurant, or it may be required in a park or a sports arena. Some states have passed the laws but have excluded restaurants. Some states have passed laws so it's included at all public venues. So it is up to the legislation specifically for that state that has been passed. There's not a national law that has been passed.
Yeah. Another question, is there funding for food service because of the Disability Act? Is there funding to make people be able to offer the other ingredients, offer the other foods, et cetera, equipment?
So I said that, is there funding coming from who? For
the government.
And for what?
For food service equipment, food service maybe staff, for that area training, because there is a disability, because there's the law.
Okay, because of the laws of the ADA. So there is,
right.
That's another great question. There is not, and that is one reason that I've crawled myself out of the woods and am coming back into the field, because I do feel that it is very necessary that we have this information out there and we start having the funding, and legislation is passed that we have funding. But currently, to answer that question, there currently is not funding out there specifically because there have been laws passed for ADA and disability. However, if there is a 504 plan that has been taken place and there is the ADA law that they are recognizing and they're adhering to for schools and universities, that is definitely something that you can work with your state legislatures. I have seen that done in Florida and in Georgia. They can work with that, and I'll be happy to discuss that with them as well separately. But that is something we need. And again, that comes right back to having this research and needing proper documentation so that we can get funding and proper research out there so that funding is available for people that want to put these in place.
What is the difference between food allergies and food tolerances? What is the difference between food allergies and food intolerances?
So a food allergy is an immunologic response. And a food allergy can precipitate at any time into an anaphylactic reaction. You may start out by having hives or a small reaction, and every time that you ingest that item, it could potentially get into a more severe reaction. A food intolerance is more of a gastric, what's the best way to describe this? Oh, put me on the spot. I've been out of this for 2 years. It's not an immunologic. So you're going to have, like, for, let's say you have your lactose intolerance. You're not going to develop an allergy from that intolerance, but it's going to give you gastrointestinal problems. You're going to have other problems from that. That is something you definitely need to watch. But the main difference is the food allergy is going to react to your mast cells and your histamine, and it's an immunologic reaction.
Another question is, with eggs and milk, does it make a difference if they are cooked into a product? With eggs and milk, does it make a difference if they are cooked into a product?
Good question. So on a survey I did with the National Restaurant Association, one of the questions that was asked is, if you cook the product, does it make a difference? Does it take the allergen away? Milk is still milk, egg is still egg, a peanut is still peanut. So although you have cooked the protein, it has not changed the protein enough to change the allergen variation within that protein.
Okay. Another question. How would you recommend designating tools and equipment when dealing with a population that may have various different food allergies? If purple is allergy, and just give me a second, reading the question. How would you recommend designating tools and equipment when dealing with a population that may have various different food allergies?
The best way to, go ahead.
And something with purple, if purple equals allergy. So that's what they said.
Okay, so when purple equals allergy, people see purple equipment, they recognize that within the food allergy community. So if you have people that have multiple allergies that are coming in, let's say you have 5 people that come in, they have 5 different allergies, and you want to utilize your purple equipment, is kind of where I'm going with this question. You need to have proper sanitation protocol in place. So after every allergen meal is created, then you would go in, you would sanitize, clean all of your equipment and all of your tools, and you would restart from the very beginning, just as if it's a new meal that you're prepping. But you're going to reuse those products, so you need to have proper sanitation protocol in place, which is why it's important to work with proper sanitation company that understands proper allergen control with that.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. One is, do you have any theories why there are so many people experiencing food allergies compared to 20 to 30 years ago? She says, I may have missed your answer, but could you reiterate it? Do you have any theories why there are so many? And I think you did say at the beginning why.
So I discussed that a little bit with the slides when I was talking about all the fun math statistical data with, I get to have my nerdy moment with math. And you know, if I could give you that answer, that's a multi-billion-billion-dollar answer. But they were going through and they were really looking at geography. But no, the ultimate answer is that no, I can't give you the exact answer on why we have so many allergens today. But the reason I discussed all of those slides is we've been seeing a different trend, and we can see how things have been changing. Where 20 years ago, their focus was people that live in the farms, in the rural areas, they're not having as many allergies because they're exposed, versus people that are living in the city and more urban, they have all the allergens. Where I can also discuss a LEAP study that was done, I think it was about 5 years ago, it came out, where they talked about having the peanuts, and they were introducing peanuts to children. And those that were being introduced to the peanuts, and I'm not at all, let me make this very clear, I'm not stating this as telling you to give children peanuts and to do this on your own. This was done under direct study with a physician, and they were looking to see if they introduced the allergen early on, and that actually diminished how many, reduced the number of patients that had the allergen later on in life. So it's really kind of flip-flop.
Jordan, and to answer that, I've been reading studies on that because I have a grandson. And so to answer that, the doctors, the pediatricians, and the dietitians are to introduce anything that is an allergen to be introduced earlier in small doses to see if there's a reaction, because they feel the body builds up. And so they have worked that way. The pediatric community and the dietitians that are working with them have pushed that forward. And so I don't know how long they've been doing it, but I do know from the research I'm reading is that it has lessened, it has increased the tolerance, and so it has lessened the allergy. So that may be an opportunity to capture or reduce the allergens in children and then obviously adolescents. One final question, and then the other ones will be answered. Jordan will send you an answer. But so many products have soybean oil, and I read that soybean oil is so refined that it was not considered an allergen by itself. Is that still the case?
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
So many products have soybean oil, and I read that soybean oil is so refined that it was not considered an allergen by itself. Is that still the case?
If soybean oil is completely refined? So when you talk about refined, so refined oil, this is very specific. When you talk about refined oil, there's literature that does state that if the soybean oil is refined to a certain specific amount, that it will clear the allergen. However, I will say on a personal note, you definitely need to read that research, and that is a case by case if you want to use that and have that as something that you're going to stand behind. From a person that has an allergy, that's also on them and I would say that needs to be their decision if they want to have that product. If you're going to serve that product, they still need to know it's a refined product, but it is a soybean product.
Well, we have a lot more questions. Jordan will get you back the answer to those questions, but we run out of time today. Jordan, thank you so very much for informing us and educating and re-educating us and really giving us clarity on the legislation out there, the studies, and what to do. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the Alluserv educational webinar. Please answer our survey. It helps us get better, and it also gives us other ideas for topics. Thank you for joining us. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you, and I look forward to speaking to everyone that has questions, being in contact. Thank you so much.